Okay, welcome back everybody. Welcome back into the room. Who had the katsu curry? Very nice, very nice. Whoever's got this this first session after lunch. Yeah, it's a tough call, isn't it? But and the strawberry cheesecake as well. But hopefully you're fed and watered and you're refueled, ready to go for an afternoon session that will be fun-packed, but intellectually challenging as well. So thank you for flagship. Yes, very good. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Philippa Keller, who's going to be chairing this next panel, Reimagining Later Living. How do we move beyond age-segmented retirement communities and towards places that support continuity of living? So Philippa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to do a panel session now, really talking about reimagining later living. So we know at the moment there are quite limited options in terms of where people live. So it seems a bit ironic because I'm going to be talking. I used to run Richmond Villages, which is one of those options, which is an integrated retirement community. Oh, stand up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. So we actually run integrated retirement communities, which are obviously for people of a certain wealth, I think it's fair to say. But we actually do a whole continuum of care within our villages, so people can move in independently. They can then have assisted living, where we support them with all sorts of facilities, such as like food, laundry, etc., and care. And then we also have care homes on site, so that people, if they need to, can get the full support. It's particularly, we get a lot of people where couples that move in, where one of them is on a journey to require more care, and they give that support so that the family member who ends up needing that care, people already feel that they're part of a community, so that they know that their loved one that isn't part of that care facility actually gets supported as well, because it can be very difficult when one of your partner moves into a care facility, that loneliness. Our villages are very much about that whole community feel. I think people often view integrated retirement communities as being isolating. They're very much about being part of the local community. And I think one of the lessons that we have absolutely learnt is locating them nearer to towns and cities is the right way to go forward, because people still want to be part of their local community. We want to be part of the local community. We do a lot of work with nurseries, schools. We work with the National Literacy Association. So a lot of our residents are teaching school children literacy, reading, writing, and it's fantastic to see that intergenerational work together. There's a lot that the older generation want to give to the younger generation, and I have to say the children absolutely love listening and talking to the older people. Some of the stories, we do video some of them if any of you want to go on Instagram. They are very funny. A lot of fascination about how could you possibly live to 100 and what have you possibly done to be, through all those years. And it's really important to get those stories, that knowledge transfer. So whilst we do what we do, we absolutely recognise there needs to be more options for people, particularly how do we support people in their own homes. And as you probably know, with all of the leasehold reform going on, with all the challenges with planning, it's going to be a really good conversation to talk to our experts about what do we do within this sector? How do we make sure that we're listening to our potential customers or the people ageing, and younger people, and how do we get everybody working together to support them to live well? Definitely within Richmond Villages, our residents were not shy in telling us what we'd got wrong. They are experts, obviously, and they will tell us exactly what we've got wrong. Particularly things such as one resident said to me, you talk about luxury. Well, it's not luxury if it's not functional. And that's a very fair point. So it's all about how do we learn from people and make sure that when we build facilities, whether they are retirement communities or housing or cities or, environments, that we absolutely listen to those people that are going to live in there and the challenges they're going to experience. And I think the mobility one was fantastic. I hadn't even thought about if you had an electric car, how would you get your electric car charged? It hadn't even crossed my mind. So it's why it's so important to get the voices of everyone to understand those challenges and how do we make sure that later living is for everybody, but it's not just exclusive, it's also inclusive of the whole community. So on that note, I'm going to invite up my esteemed panel, if that's all right, and I'll get them to introduce themselves. I think we should all sit down. So I shall let you just introduce yourselves and a little bit about what the work you do. So.
Hi guys, you can hear me? Okay, that's good. So I'm Evangelia Krisikou, sorry I was not here this morning when you referred to me. I'm an academic at the Bartlett, director of the MSc Healthcare Facilities, the only program in the world, and we work very closely with AAA and Ian on healthcare built environments. And I work a lot with policy, have been like in the EIP on active aging, coordinating the environment section of the EU, and recently working with several governments, from Greece to Peru to Japan, on aspects of built environment and people's health.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'm still David, and as far as I know, I'm still chair of the Clarion Housing Association board.
Thanks, David. Liz?
I'm still Liz, and hopefully I'm still the CEO of AGK London.
I'm Matt Richardson. I am Design and Technical Director for McCarthy and Stone. So I juggle standards with our customers' needs, actual needs, alongside trying to make a bit of money out of it.
Okay, so Matt, I'm going to go to you first. So for McCarthy and Stone, this is obviously a really interesting area because you do retirement housing, obviously work with us in terms of retirement communities. So what do you think this is going to really mean for you and the way you design your retirement housing units?
So he's got a
Presentation,
Shall I do a little...
yes, go for it.
Go up here, because I got the button then. Yeah, so it's all about juggling and weighing things up, really, and getting that balance right. Do I just go next?
No.
Oh, I've changed them. There we go. And for me, this standard, it just makes sense. It makes business sense. But also, and I think you can see from Philippa as well, that when we're working in this sector, this later living sector, there's real passion, and I love what I do, but I have to balance that passion with the economic realities of what is a very tough market at the moment. So last time I was here, I was talking about one building amongst a multi-generational neighbourhood. And the great thing about 5553 is it's going to give us a standard to pin on everything that's around our building. So that's going to allow us to put a single building, get it to fit into a multi-generational neighbourhood, which is great. But actually, we can do a lot more, and we need to do a lot more, because we've really got to rethink this later living thing. So if you think about we hear it in the press, we hear it on all of our promotional stuff. Look, over 55s, you've got a single block, and this is not specifically McCarthy and Stone. This could be many of our competitors, and a single building. You've got a market of technically over 55, so 21 million people in this country. Absolutely brilliant. What could be better than that? Well, actually, the reality is that when we say retirement homes, retirement living, is actually over 65. So that brings that market down to about 13.3. These are slightly made up figures, but I think it makes the point. So that's still a good market, that's great. But then when you actually look at who wants to move into a development such as this, you're probably down to about 3 million, and that the age group is something between 75 and 81. So we have to do something from a business point of view, to increase that. And I think the international standard really helps us do that, because actually in reality, it's even worse than this. Because when you actually look at who wants to move into a development like this, and who can afford to move into a development like this, it shrinks even smaller. So we're trying to think, well, what can we do to make that better? And that makes it better from our bottom line, but actually it makes it better for how a development would fit into a community and how we help to form that neighbourhood. So how are we going to do that? Lo and behold, the amazing invention of the bungalow. But actually, if we start changing... I was trying to avoid that. If we start changing our tenure, mix our tenure up, mix the typology up, that will make a big difference. And maybe that will increase that share of the market. And that will help us. And also, what if we started building houses as well? So we're starting to form, similar to Philippa's villages, but we're starting to spread that out and create within our little red line, within the larger community, a real mix of generations. But I think we need to go a step further than that. And this is where it would get difficult. We've got policy to deal with. We've got people's preconceptions to deal with. But what if all of these had mixed generations in? What if they were family houses? And perhaps you could move into a family house, and as you get older, maybe you're going to move into a different typology, or maybe your family moves in, and actually my father could live in this development. And so we can start to really use the standard to really help us and to shape how our developments come together. And having that standard gives us a blueprint to move forward. So we end up with invigorating and linking together a neighbourhood which is empowered by the standard that we're all here today for. And just a little last cheeky thing, I've got to dash off in a minute because I have to go and run a bit more than a marathon. We put our money where our mouth is. We believe passionately in what we do. And we have a charitable foundation that is match funded by the business. So for every penny that I've sponsored to go and run a ridiculous route, the business puts another penny in. So if you'd like to sponsor me, I'll be bruised and battered tomorrow morning. Start at 5:30 in the morning. Thank you.
I'm going to be cheeky now and ask you a question.
Yeah, go on.
So how do you see planning working with us, and how do you think the ISO will help us with those planning conversations?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is where I think that for us, and one of the reasons we're so behind this standard is so important. If you look at a building regulation, you look at the building regulations in this country, and they often relate straight to a British standard. So that's really easy. The regulations can be written, and then you can just link it straight to a very well-formed British standard or a European standard that then gives the real instructions and the information. Our hope is, and we are pushing this with as far as we can, is that actually a planning policy can link directly to this international standard. So it gives that blueprint. It means there's less work for the local authority to do, but it gives a very clear picture of what we're aiming for. And that would make all the difference to us and our communities.
I agree completely. Thank you. Evangeline, just to link in with you. So you're really interested in the health side of things and how it links into the building and keeping people well. What do you think this ISO means for the work that you've been doing?
I was thinking, for me this ISO is something that we have been advocating since like 10 years ago in the EU, but I was inspired by today's discussion and something that crossed my mind outside this ISO and outside my work on aging, because I have been working and essentially creating the field of medical architecture for the last 30 years. But I was not always in aging or not always focusing on aging. So what struck me today, because I was keeping some notes that now I have a difficulty to read because I don't read my own. So, because most of my work, from the beginning of my work, I have been working to understand the needs of the people, the real needs of the people. In my case, when I started, it was the real needs of psychiatric patients, because at that time, they didn't have the right to vote. So they were completely deprived of... So actually today got me thinking, not on aging, but on psychiatric, which is very weird, but I'll tell you something. I've visited hundreds of psychiatric facilities. I'm going off topic, but you will see. I will make my point. Hundreds. And from protected apartments to the more secure facility in the US where they lock the president's assassins. And I have worked from the Maori mental health to all the communities you can imagine across continents. And what I noticed, and I have a paper on that, is that whoever builds standards, there's not a standard there, but there are kind of guidelines. And whatever they do in each facility, it's not about the needs of the people. What are the needs of the people? Which is what I was doing when I started my work, trying to understand the needs of the people. And this is what we have been trying to do here. Eventually, I was measuring how, like, the institutional elements of a building. How a building, what are the, like, created an index of how institutional a building should be. And then I started applying that index in hundreds of buildings. Then I saw that over the years, the more buildings I was researching, the more the disagreement, what are the absolutely minimum and the ligature features were. So I started, let's say, and the more countries I would bring in, the less consensus there was. Over the years, the buildings were becoming more restrictive, but looking into more buildings and countries, those restrictions were less common if you put all the buildings together. So I ended up having only 4 figures, only 4 elements that facilities agree that are absolutely necessary, because 4 figures that everybody has, let's say, which today with what we discussed this morning and what you have been presenting was not what are the needs of the people, but where do we need to limit the people? So my understanding in the mental health research, and I should start translating that in the aging research, is not anymore establishing the need, but establishing how far do we limit people unnecessarily. That's my point. Because what I saw in the psychiatric is that we started, let's say, limiting people, locking doors, preventing them to have their own locker, preventing them to have their own mailbox that they used to have in the very past, preventing them this and that and that, and then their own toilet. But then if you look to every facility prevents something different, which means if they were truly dangerous on the first place, why in this facility they can cope with that element and the others cannot? That's what I'm saying. So overall, the elements that they become more limiting over the years increase. But the elements that are limiting in every facility, the more facilities I bring in, the least are these elements. Which means for the elements that there is not an absolute consensus, we limit people unnecessarily. So I think, and I put myself first here, instead of looking at the needs of the people, which we need to do, and we need to continue to do, we need to start how much we limit people, old people, unnecessarily. So the person that was not allowed to get out of the chair, but then somebody else could work with allowing them to get out of the chair. I mean, the people that I have seen in care homes being like strapped. And I was evaluating a psychiatric facility the other day that straps people. And so all these things that we unnecessarily impose to people when other facilities, other people elsewhere, other communities have solutions for. For me, this is a thought that I got from these discussions today.
So yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So hopefully with having this ISO and the framework and everything, we can sort of get to that point that we all value, like judge risk in a similar way, and that risk shouldn't outweigh how people want to live their lives.
And evaluate the risk.
Yeah.
And the other point that I got from today is that, it's an important point, but what are the right questions? Oh my God, it's so difficult to remember that. What are the right questions? And because this ISO will be evolving. So I think we need to start gathering what are the questions that the next step should be asking. I'll bring you a very silly example. Very silly. I was interviewed last week by the Times for a scandal in the NHS in Scotland. I will not tell the name of the hospital. But that hospital apparently cost 900 million to build. Let's say $1 billion. That was the figure, more or less. And then 1 year later, it broke. And then it cost 50 million to fix over 10 years. Now, the question I was asked was, is 50 million for a building of 100 million correct? Correct figure. Like of a 900, of almost $1 billion, correct figure. Now, that's a silly question. It's a question that everybody would be asking when 1 billion money are involved, and on top of that 1 billion, another 50 are involved. Another 50 million. But it's a very silly question. Because I will make the paradigm a bit ridiculous but different. Let's say in the same hospital, there was a machine that cost 1 billion. And it took 5 million to fix. And that machine we took 10 years to fix. Would that question be like a proton beam therapy? Therefore, patients would not be able to have proton beam therapy after that. Would the question be, if a proton beam cost 1 billion, okay? And if it cost 50 million to repair, okay? Or it would be, why we bought a machine, it doesn't matter how much it cost, and it broke, and it took us 10 years to fix. And in the meantime, people were dying or delaying treatment because it took 10 years to fix. So that's the right question. So why do we ask silly questions about buildings? That's my second. So the ISO needs to ask the right questions.
Very true, because it is. You can go to the wrong answer if you don't ask the right question in the first place. Thank you. David, so what do you think this all means for Clarion going forward?
Good question. I'll come back to it in a minute. Can I start with what you were saying, Evangelina, about limitations? You were talking about physical limitations. One of the things that I've been thinking about today, and not just today, is how we limit our expectations. How we limit our expectations kind of for ourselves, but more particularly how society limits its expectations of people who we deem to be older. So number one, 55 is midlife. For heaven's sake, stop talking about people over 55 being on the cusp of old age. It is, not only is it complete nonsense, but it is denying the reality of those people's lives and where they are in their lives. How many people do you know who got their biggest, most important job, the defining thing that they did in their lives when they were older than 55? Not when they're about to move into a retirement complex. So let's start with that. And actually, let's not do 65 either. 65 is not even the state age for retirement pensions any longer. Most of you will be confronting this. It's going to get a little bit higher and a little bit higher. So 65 is utterly meaningless. Let's make it, if we've got to do this at all, let's make it 75 or 80, which is actually the time, I think, observationally, that people are beginning to think, right, do I need to do something different? Second reflection, this is absolutely critical for Clarion, is I'm quite happy with what McCarthy and Stone does. I think it's a useful product. I think there are some retirement complexes that are great. I think some people will be happy enough to move into sheltered housing or whatever the next iteration of it is. More than 90% of us will never ever live in specialist accommodation for older people. So the focus of the conversation has to be about the more than 90% of us who will always live in ordinary houses, in ordinary streets, in ordinary communities across the country. And how do we provide the resources, the support, the context that those people need? That is absolutely an issue for Clarion, which has an ageing population, and where our research on the typical resident, Clarion resident of the future, indicates that unless things change, and we're trying to make things change, but unless things change, they will be older than is currently the case. We will have fewer children living in our homes. We will have more people who are very poor. We will have more people who have a range of emotional and physical vulnerabilities. So how are we going to provide the proper context for those people in our communities? Well, we don't do it by imposing societal expectations about, well, you're quite old now and you're a bit poor and you're hurpling along, so you've not really got a future any longer. I was saying this over there. I've said this from this platform before. But listen carefully, everyone. Older people do not just have a past and memories. Older people have a future and ambitions for the future. You talk to anyone I know. I'm an older person. Talk to anyone I know and they'll be telling you about the things they're planning. Not talking mainly about what they did 50 years ago. Really not. We live in the present, we live in the future. And not only that, Liz and I were starting a little, and I think you might say more about this in a minute, but honestly, the contribution that older people make to the smooth functioning of society is monumental. And we need to support, well, we need to understand it and then support it and encourage it and put the structures in place that continue to make it possible. And just as a living, breathing, working example, I'm going to have to go at the end of this session because I'm on some emergency grandparenting childcare. So I'm having to run off to do that. I am not at all unusual in that regard. Not at all. So I think the whole ISO framework is asking us to think differently. It's asking us to think differently about the nature of neighbourhoods, the nature of communities, the nature of how we live in those places. A lot of it is about kit, about the background, the context, how you build the homes, how you use AI, all of those things. But we need to think differently about how we value our older people. And Age UK and the Centre for Ageing Better and others do great work on this stuff, and it is absolutely worth checking that out. And it's up to people like Clarion, organisations like Clarion, to be creative about this. We run a thing called the Sutton Prize. I talked about William Sutton earlier. I was one of the judges for last year's one. And one of the prizes was to a company called Neighbourly Labs, who have a product called NEA, your neighbourhood AI tool. And the point about this, it is now trialling. We've got a couple of these going. It is an AI tool. It is available on your phone. And what it does, it's like WhatsApp, except it's not encrypted, it's open, but there is no way that you can spot the phone number or the individual contact details of the people who are on it. It's like a message board where people can say, I've just started a gardening club, is anyone interested? Or, I heard that there's a quiz night in a pub somewhere. Anyone fancy coming to, join our team? So after 8 weeks of the first pilot in Oxfordshire, which we're doing along with 2 other housing associations, there have been 800 people, 8 weeks, 800 people signed up. Of those 800 people, organically, without any external intervention at all, we already know that there are 250 different groups that have been created. This tool has the potential to be transformational in creating a safe way for people to communicate with folk in their neighbourhood. And we need to do more of that. And my one other example, we have had the support of the Rothsey Foundation in providing well-being places across the country. We have more than 50 of them. Last year, 65,000 people used them. They are not age-specific. People of all ages use them. People come in. They started by being warm places. You go to be warm in the winter, but they very quickly became much, much more than that. They became hubs where people, for all kinds of reasons, could just go and talk to other people, and we can do things. You can organise things. These are just examples. It doesn't really matter what they are. The question is, are we thinking creatively about how we create the connections that allow people to feel that they are integral to their own communities?
Thank you, David. And your passion comes through abundance. And I'm glad you said 55 pluses. And yeah, I totally agree with you. Having just tipped into that age group, I don't consider myself old. And I think one of the other things we should really think about as well as like employers, the demographics are changing. People want to work older, but they don't necessarily want to do the same sort of roles or the same sort of hours. And we need to really think about how, as employers, we change roles and we change, expectations of how people work to make sure that people that are older can still work and can still contribute, because, no longer is it like you have to retire. People want to stay working, and I think it's really important that we encourage people where they do want to work to continue working. I must admit, my most challenging conversations in my career have been with the residents' associations, some of our communities. I have been challenged in ways that my brain hasn't quite ever considered. So I completely agree with you. The people that live in these communities, or just in any way, have so much to contribute to society. And I know, Liz, there's something that you and I were talking about that, how important community and connection is. Well, and how do we do that? And how does the ISO help people do that? Yeah. And I think David raised a really important point about safe and trusted. And I think tech and AI is a period, it worries people, doesn't it? People worried about being scammed, etc. And I think the ISO and the focus on that trust and governance is really, really important.
I think trust is key, really. I think for the older Londoners that we talk with and are communicating with all the time, all of this is fine. And if we had lots more of them here, they'd all be saying, well, this is great. It all sounds wonderful, but I'm not giving you my data. Who are you? you're not a trusted person that I can deal with. So the actual reality that trust has to be at the heart of everything we do. I think David really made me think about a few things, actually. David, thank you. And one of them is what you're talking about. I know you're talking about communication and connection, but you're also talking about the agency, the ability, so the group you're talking about, the ability to say, yeah, look, this is something I want to do. I've been given through technology, in that case, the agency to then ask who wants to join the group, who fancies going to the pub tonight, who, in a safe environment. And I think that's where what we've been talking about and the ISO and the standard could really change people's lives. And when I said at the beginning in my speech, London's the fastest ageing place and there's 1.4 million older people in there. Well, actually, that's a huge opportunity. That's a really massive, it's not a negative, it's a really wonderful, positive opportunity, and we need to embrace that and find how best to support that and get people to live their best lives.
And Liz, just as a question, because I know you were talking earlier about dementia, and one of the things is as we live in a more digital age, conversations I've had with people about multi-factor authentication and ageing and dementia have been, really difficult. So, and I think, we have to think, don't we, differently about how we do that. How do you support people that are going through maybe that dementia journey and that fear of technology, and it can be in one moment to the next?
Yeah, I think to be honest, the technology has got to lead it in a way, because the technology's got to be trusted. I don't know how I'm going to quite phrase this, but for example, if someone is in their home and Alexa or whatever technology is helping them get through the day, remember the tablets, remember where they are, remember, test for if they're about to fall, work out where they are at any given point, that suddenly becomes a relationship. That is the connections that we're talking about. We're not just talking about those human connections, we're talking about the connection between the older person and the tech. And I think I've had some conversations with some of the more techie people on this conversation, and that really is their challenge. Their challenge is to make it accessible and trusted, and then this will work, but it won't work if we don't have that.
Yeah, and it has to learn that person, doesn't it, and age with them, because you go through different things. Is there any questions from the audience at all?
Everybody's very tired after lunch.
Yes, lunch. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, I was relying on my fabulous projection before I realised there was a microphone. I kind of want to tie some of what you've been talking about to one of the comments that one of the panellists made this morning about an assumption that we make that people do want to share data. Because I would argue that we actually make an assumption that people don't. And I find it quite ironic that at many conferences like this, where we're talking about data and digital, that we're still relying on assumptions. So I would love to understand, given your expertise on this panel, have you seen any more robust data, or just what's your gut, be brave, what's your gut instinct? What do you think the red lines really are, especially for those amongst us who are in that older demographic? To David's point, I was 50 this year, so apparently I'm on the way out already.
It's all right, there's still hope.
Thank you, I appreciate that. What do you think the red lines really are? And the reason I'm asking that is, I suppose, I've got, like many people in this room, a parent who is elderly and frail, and we've spent a lot of time in the last year navigating a very disjointed system. And when we started, sadly, he's a very big Daily Mail reader. I've tried, it's too late. He was extremely anti-sharing data. And when he saw me crying, putting down the phone again, because I'd had to have the same conversation again with the 20th provider that we needed to engage, he suddenly started to change his mind. And I would like to get us to a point where you don't have to have an experience like that to change your mind. So how do we ask the right questions in these surveys when people drop the data saying they're for or against it? How do we get those conversations happening, particularly with the older generation, who I think are probably maybe even a bit more up for it than some of us youngsters?
Not if he's been reading the Daily Mail.
No, well, no. We haven't even...
Terrified.
Liz, did you?
Yeah, again, I totally agree with you, but I think it's about older people seeing and being part of that conversation and having their voice right in the middle of those conversations. So it's not something that's being done to them. They are part of the solution and part of those decisions. And having that trust, I'm going to go back to that, but trusting. And your father obviously trusted you, didn't want you to be upset. and that's part of it. And how we get there is a big conversation. And actually, I agree with you as well. I think we should have some more robust data about what that actually means, and what sharing your data and what that fear is, and so on. Have those conversations a bit more. But yeah, I think
I was just going to add to that. I'm in the same position. You know, my parents are in their late 80s. There's a fear of everything to do with data. I think we've got to do better about talking about the benefits of sharing data. I think everything in the press tends to be a negative, and actually we've got to start really storytelling about what the benefits are. The fact that a lot of what you can learn is from anonymous data, and I think it's really important to say, actually, we can pinpoint these things, we can get more preventative, we can do what, and really talk about the positives, and then start to show the impact it has, and not be afraid to say, this is the positive of sharing data. From a Bupa point of view, I know that every customer expects us to be one Bupa, and we're not necessarily, because the data is in different areas. And yet, I'm sure you've all had that experience where you ring up someone and they say, oh, sorry, you're going to have to ring this other number, and it's the same company, and you think, why am I ringing another company? And as you get older, that gets even more difficult, doesn't it? You know, just trying to book an eye appointment and a hearing appointment in the same company was a nightmare. You're nodding your head, you've had that one. And you think, come on, so I think it's then saying, well, what are the benefits? But absolutely having an ISO where people trust and know that there's that, you know, the guardrails, I think is really important. And calling out when people aren't part of that, or, you know, those guardrails, and being brave enough to do it, I would say. Anybody else? No? Any other questions?
Well, sorry, before I go on to my question, who provides these guardrails in the ISO? But my question is a housing one, because we've got 3 housing people here. And we know that lots and lots of people would love co-housing. It's a fabulous way to meet people's needs. It's very complicated in this country to do it. I did a survey of U3A members, of whom there are 400,000 in the country. 7,500 people filled in the questionnaire, didn't need to do any more after that. 15% of them interested in co-housing. Half of them for older people, half multi-generational. Personally, I prefer the multi-generational. So my question to the panel is, do you think this would help achieve many of these objectives as part of a broader development? Obviously doesn't want to be on a big scale, but one of the options available to people. And if so, how do we do more of it? Thank you.
I can tell you're leaning forward. David, you're ready to go.
I mean, so much of this is, as we've been discussing, comes down to trust, doesn't it? And imagination. And my goodness, we lack imagination. Planners, wonderful people, under a lot of pressure, but planners are not encouraged to be imaginative. I think planning ought to be one of these fantastic jobs where you've engaged in a kind of visionary activity of creating a place that's going to be fantastic in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years' time. But far too often, it becomes a process question or that dormer window is just a little bit too high, so get rid of it, and all that kind of nonsense, real nonsense that slows everything down and makes people think this is such a slog. And trying to get co-housing developments off the ground. I mean, obviously there are one or two brilliantly successful ones. But even when there are one or two brilliantly successful ones, people don't then look at it and say, hey, they might be onto something here. Let's do more of it. You just have to stumble your way through all of the hurdles all over again. And we are catastrophically bad at turning brilliant individual projects into this is the way we do things. This is just incorporated into how we do it. And we are fed a constant diet of, well, you can't trust people, you can't trust institutions. I'm happy. I'm sure many of us here are part of these various mass population health research projects. I've just recently joined one about dementia. I'm pleased to tell you they don't think I've got it yet. But I'm happy to share my data there because I'm not anxious about it. I trust the people I'm giving it to, and I think it has the potential to be of benefit to the wider population. These are stories that fit all kinds of things, but what we say is don't trust them, don't trust them, don't trust them. It's a mindset change.
Yeah, and I think learning from each other, we all make similar mistakes, don't we? Like within housing, was that, what if we all shared things, we'd all move at such a faster pace. Why would we all make the same mistake individually? When one does it, let's learn, let's move on. How do we work together? And I think that's the only way that you're going to make the change. And that, when you've got one voice, isn't it? Then the planners will take notice, and they'll be encouraged then to look for the right options within their areas. Sorry, Matt.
Just on the co-housing, I worked on a co-housing scheme that took years and years to get there, and it is now absolutely in Dorset, absolutely fantastic. And I think really what the standard and what our thinking needs to be is all about diversity. And as David says, McCarthy and Stone has got its place. Absolutely agree with that. Retirement home, what a stupid phrase. But actually, we need to have a planning system that encourages a mix of everything, and that's when it works. And it's, later living, retirement living. It's too much of a niche. What we're really trying to do is create great places to live and lots of choice, and then it'll work, rather than siloing everything together.
And older people don't necessarily want to move out of where they are. They build their community. They want a neighbourhood that they can live in through the life course, and we should be creating that, really, shouldn't we?
The worst thing in my career, the worst thing that I see, is when you go to one of our developments, which are generally joyous places, but you meet someone whose children have twisted their arm and got them to go and live in a development, and it's just soul destroying. And it's trying to create a situation where actually the choices are there and people want to move to different places, whatever they are.
Yeah.
Completely agree. It is all about choices. There's not one size fits all. It's up to each individual and the circumstances. And those circumstances change as well. So helping people to move into the right environment is always really important. Have we got another question? That was your question. Okay. At the back there. Have we got time for one more? Or? One more. Okay.
Thank you, Nick. It's people that make a place. Physical environment is important to create the opportunity. What's the business model going forward on funding these interactions to create place? Bupa's one business model, Clarion's another, McCarthy Stone's another. How do we fund the intergenerational activities, and where does the funding come from, and what's the business model?
I mean, I can only talk about from a Bupa's point of view. So Bupa doesn't have shareholders, so actually all of the profit that we make, we reinvest into the businesses. So we have like retirement living projects and different things all across the world. So we're fortunate that we get all of our funding internally. But
So there isn't one business model, and I don't think we should be seeking for one business model. But I think when we are working out, so if in Clarion's case, if you've moved the question from how can we build as many more social rented homes as possible to how do we create fantastic communities that people want to live in, then you have to do your pricing and your costing on that assumption, not on the assumption just about the number of homes that you can build. And it's a mindset change, isn't it? It's approaching it from a different perspective. None of this is going to be easy. Anyone who tells you that there are easy answers to this is going to get it wrong. But there's a profit ambition where it is possible to use a proportion of the profit to invest into the community, which might mean you get slightly less profit day one, but you might build a bigger profit stream into the future. There's a non-profit model, there's a social enterprise model. There are different ways of looking at it, but it depends on the question that you ask at the top. I mean, what you were saying about ask the good questions.
I suppose the right thing is to show that it works. If it works, things get invested in. And I think we know it works. And I think the ISO is a really great way of demonstrating this is going to work. So why would you not invest? Yes.
Is this working? I don't know because the other wasn't. Okay, so just a note here. Because you mentioned it's not the places, it's the people. Actually, that's not true. We cannot distinguish between spaces and society, who shapes what. But we know that a certain space can create a structure in society. And it's not about the colors, it's not about the light, it's how spaces can create communities, and the space will determine the social values of the communities. And we have a lot of evidence for that. And vice versa, a community, a society creates their own space. So we can see a building, for example, historically, and can know from the building if that was an autocratic or a democratic society. Because how people interact in space and they move in space. So we shouldn't. So a lot of elements that are there are actually deeply influenced by our environments. It's not only the business models and the spaces. So, for example, what you showed with the small houses and the configuration of a bigger house and the community, that enables that different scenarios enable different computer interactions, different people interactions, and different opportunities for co-presence, and different business models, but also different social models. So we shouldn't be so simplistic on those, because they are very, very deep-rooted channels that we operate and people operate, and building shapes are so, it's not so straightforward.
I think that's why it's all incorporated in the ISO. All those multi-factors.
That's a very good point. If we could get this mic yet. Okay, so I'm going to answer that because I've been asked to play for time a little bit while the mics are exchanged. So if you sit for a second, Philippa, so I can answer the question. And if one by one you gradually go and switch your mics with the next panel, before you get off that stage, they want to see the dance move. I've promised. But thank you everyone for this panel discussion.